The desperate gamble Admiral Kareth stood before the vast observation window of the Council Station Omega, his chitinous fingers trembling against the cool metal railing. The view beyond should have shown the brilliant light highway of the galactic trade routes, thousands of ships moving like luminous rivers through the darkness of space. Instead, he saw only the dim emergency lights of disabled vessels drifting helplessly in the void. The galaxy was dying, not from war or plague, but from silence. The phenomenon had started 3 months ago in the Outer Rim territories. Ships reported complete electrical failures without warning. Communications arrays went dark. Navigation systems simply stopped functioning. At first, the Galactic Council believed it was equipment malfunction, perhaps a bad batch of quantum processors from the Talani factories. Then entire planets went dark. Billions of beings trapped on worlds where nothing electronic worked anymore. No lights, no climate control, no food distribution systems, no medical equipment, nothing. The Council scientists called it the silence. It spread like ripples across water, sector by sector, world by world. Every attempt to study it failed because the instruments used to measure it would cease functioning the moment they entered an affected zone. The Jalene were a species that had mastered quantum mechanics 15,000 years ago. Kareth's people had built wonders that bent the very fabric of reality. Yet they stood helpless before a problem they could not even properly observe, let alone understand or solve. Worse still, someone was taking advantage of the chaos. The Vex Collective, a militant faction that had long opposed the Council's peace treaties, launched coordinated attacks on the disabled stations and planets. They possessed shielding technology that somehow protected their systems from the silence. Nobody knew how. Every attempt to capture their ships for study ended in self-destruction protocols that left nothing but debris. The Vex were systematically conquering the galaxy, while the Council fleet sat frozen and dark, unable to fight back. Unable even to communicate with each other except through primitive light signals that took hours to transmit across solar systems. Kareth turned from the window as Counselor Mavesh entered the command center. The Talvani diplomat moved slowly on her 4 legs, her silver scales reflecting the emergency lighting in worried patterns. Mavesh had served the Council for 60 years, guiding hundreds of species through disputes and crises with patient wisdom. Now she looked ancient and tired, carrying the weight of a dying civilization on her narrow shoulders. The report from Sector 7 just arrived, Mavesh said, her voice translator crackling with interference. 42 worlds have gone completely silent, no signals of any kind. We have to assume the population centers have descended into chaos without their infrastructure. Kareth felt his respiratory spiracles flutter with stress. How long until the silence reaches the core systems? According to the projection models from our mathematical division, 17 days at the current expansion rate, 17 days before the capital worlds go dark, 17 days before 1,000 years of galactic civilization collapsed completely. Kareth accessed the tactical display, one of the few systems still functioning on the station. It ran on isolated circuits protected by layers of Faraday shielding and optical connections. The map showed the silence spreading like a disease, an ever-expanding sphere of technological death. Red markers indicated Vex-controlled territories, growing larger each day as they consumed disabled Council worlds. We need a solution, Kareth said, though the words felt hollow. Every species in the galaxy had contributed their greatest minds to solving this problem. The crystal-based Nephrin who thought in mathematical dimensions beyond standard perception, the Gestalt consciousness of the Harbingers who could process information across multiple timelines simultaneously, the synthetic architects who existed as pure information within quantum networks. All of them had failed. Mavesh moved to his side, her head tilting in the Talvani gesture of sharing difficult news. There might be something, one possibility we have not explored. She activated her personal data tablet, one of the archaic backup devices that still functioned through simple electromagnetic principles. The holographic display showed a file marked with the lowest priority rating. Kareth recognized the species designation immediately: humans, the newcomers from Earth. Earth had been inducted into the Galactic Council only 5 years ago. They were a young species barely 2 centuries into their space age. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, their understanding of advanced physics rudimentary at best. The Council had granted them observer status more as a courtesy than because they had anything to contribute. Most council members viewed humans as a curious novelty, a species that had somehow achieved space travel despite coming from one of the most hostile worlds ever catalogued. Earth had been classified as a Class 9 death world, a planet where nearly everything about the environment was actively trying to kill its inhabitants. Extreme temperature variations, deadly predators, toxic microorganisms, high gravity, intense radiation, violent weather patterns, tectonic instability. Most Class 9 worlds were barren wastelands. Earth was not only inhabited, but had produced a thriving, technologically advanced civilization. The xenobiologists were still trying to understand how humans had survived long enough to evolve intelligence, let alone build starships. Why humans? Kareth asked, genuine confusion in his voice. What could they possibly offer? Their technology is centuries behind ours. Mavesh expanded the file, showing detailed reports from the initial survey teams that had visited Earth. Read this section. The part about their developmental history. Kareth began scanning through the information. His eyes widened as he processed what he was reading. Humans had developed advanced civilization without quantum technology. That alone was remarkable but not unprecedented. What caught his attention was the fact that humans had achieved global industrialization, space travel, and complex computer systems using what the report called analog and mechanical engineering. They had built calculating machines with gears and levers. They had created communication networks using electromagnetic waves and copper wires. They had flown aircraft and guided missiles using gyroscopes and pressure sensors. They had split the atom and walked on their moon before they ever developed digital electronics. Even now, human technology retained extensive backup systems using mechanical principles. Their military organizations, shaped by centuries of warfare on their violent homeworld, maintained redundant analog equipment specifically because they planned for the worst-case scenarios. Human engineers were trained in mechanical problem-solving from an early age because their environment demanded adaptability and improvisation. When things broke on Earth, you could not always wait for replacement parts. You fixed it with whatever you had available or you died. Kareth sat back in his command chair, his mind racing through the implications. Mechanical technology. Systems that did not rely on electronic components at all. Equipment that would be completely immune to the silence because it operated on physical principles rather than electrical circuits. It was so primitive it had never occurred to anyone to consider it. The galaxy had moved beyond such things thousands of years ago, but primitive might be exactly what they needed right now. The Council would never approve this, Kareth said carefully. They would see it as desperate foolishness, reaching out to a species barely past their industrial age for help with a crisis our greatest minds cannot solve. Mavesh's scales shifted to a determined bronze color. The Council is not here. They are on the capital worlds preparing for evacuation. We are the ranking officers in this sector. We have the authority to make field decisions in emergency situations. And, Admiral, this certainly qualifies as an emergency. She was right, of course. Standard protocol gave sector commanders broad discretion during crisis situations, when communication with central authority was impossible or delayed. That protocol had been written for military conflicts, not existential technological collapse, but it applied nonetheless. Send the message, Kareth decided. Use the quantum burst transmitters before the silence reaches Earth. Request immediate assistance. Tell them we need engineers, mechanics, anyone who understands pre-electronic technology. Offer them anything they want. Full Council membership, access to our archives, territory, resources, whatever it takes to get them here. Mavesh began composing the transmission immediately. What if they refuse? What if they decide our crisis is not their concern? Then we die in 17 days, Kareth said simply. And the Vex inherit a dead galaxy. The message reached Earth in a matter of hours, transmitted through the quantum communication network before the silence could intercept it. The human government received the desperate plea with surprise and concern. The Galactic Council, the mighty coalition of advanced species that had existed for millennia, was asking primitive Earth for help. The irony was not lost on human leaders. Various factions within the United Earth government debated the response. Some wanted to demand significant concessions and territory in exchange for assistance. Others argued for a humanitarian approach, helping simply because it was the right thing to do. The military advisors saw an opportunity to prove human worth on the galactic stage and gain respect from species that had treated Earth as a minor player. In the end, the decision was made quickly. Earth would send help, not a massive fleet or an army, but something more valuable. They would send the Analog Corps, a specialized division of engineers, mechanics, pilots, and technicians trained in pre-digital technology. These were people who could rebuild an engine with hand tools, navigate by star positions, communicate with signal flags, and solve complex mathematics with paper and pencil. They were specialists in making things work when modern technology failed. The UNS Pathfinder departed from Earth orbit within 36 hours of receiving the Council's request. It was a medium-sized transport vessel, ungainly and blocky by galactic standards but functional and reliable. The ship carried 200 personnel carefully selected from various branches of human expertise. Leading them was Dr. Sarah Chen, a 52-year-old aerospace engineer who had spent her career studying and preserving historical mechanical systems. She had rebuilt steam engines, repaired clockwork computers, and taught 3 generations of students the fundamental principles of physics that did not require electricity to function. The Pathfinder made the journey to Council Station Omega in 5 days, pushing its engines to maximum safe capacity. When the ship entered the docking bay, Admiral Kareth was there to meet them personally. He watched through the observation window as the human vessel maneuvered into position, using what appeared to be entirely manual control. No computer-assisted guidance, no automated docking protocols, just skilled pilots using their eyes and hands and judgment to bring the ship safely to rest. The airlock opened, and the humans emerged. Kareth had seen their species before during diplomatic functions, but never in this context. They wore practical work clothing in various shades of blue and gray. Many carried tool bags and equipment cases. They moved with the confident efficiency of people accustomed to solving problems with their hands. Dr. Chen stepped forward, a woman of average height with gray-streaked black hair tied back in a simple braid. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in every detail of the station around her with the practiced gaze of an engineer evaluating a new system. "Admiral Kareth, I presume," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Analog Corps. We understand you have a technology problem." Kareth carefully grasped her hand, mindful of his greater strength and her species' fragility. "Dr. Chen, I must be honest with you. Our situation is beyond critical. We are facing the collapse of galactic civilization. Every advanced technology we possess has failed or will fail within days. I do not know if what you have brought can help us, but we have exhausted every other option." Chen smiled, and there was something fierce and determined in that expression. Something that reminded Kareth of the reports about Death World survivors. These were people whose ancestors had faced extinction-level threats and survived through stubborn refusal to give up. "Admiral, my species has been dealing with things trying to kill us since we learned to walk upright. We got pretty good at making things work when they absolutely should not. You called us because your fancy quantum machine stopped functioning. Well, we brought 5,000 years of technology that never needed quantum mechanics in the first place. Now show us your systems and let us get to work. We have a galaxy to save, and we are going to do it the old-fashioned way." Kareth felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. Perhaps the galaxy's salvation would not come from advanced science and sophisticated technology. Perhaps it would come from the simple, brutal pragmatism of a species that had learned to survive on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Perhaps Deathworld ingenuity was exactly what the galaxy needed. The humans had arrived, and they brought with them knowledge that civilized species had forgotten. The knowledge of how to build things that worked no matter what, how to solve problems without relying on computer assistance, how to fight and win using nothing but human determination and creativity. The silence had taken away the galaxy's advanced technology, but it could not take away the one resource humans had in abundance: the ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome any obstacle through sheer stubborn willpower. The legends were about to begin when the stars went silent against all odds. The main engineering bay of Council Station Omega had never seen anything like this. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the center of organized chaos, directing her team with rapid-fire instructions while alien engineers watched in bewilderment. Humans swarmed over the station's primary power distribution system, bypassing failed electronic controls and installing mechanical regulators that looked like they belonged in a museum. Copper wires snaked across the floor in organized bundles. Pressure gauges and analog meters covered every surface. The rhythmic clanking of metal tools echoed through the vast chamber, a sound that had not been heard in Galactic Engineering Base for thousands of years. Lieutenant Marcus Webb supervised the installation of a mechanical computer in the station's tactical center. The device was enormous, filling an entire wall with gears, levers, and rotating drums. It looked absurdly primitive next to the sleek quantum processors that sat dark and useless in their mounting brackets. But when Webb engaged the hand crank and the machine clattered to life, it began calculating firing solutions and trajectory predictions with perfectly adequate accuracy. It was slow compared to quantum computing, taking several seconds to complete calculations that had once occurred instantaneously. But slow was infinitely better than not working at all. Admiral Kareth observed the transformation of his station with mixed feelings. Pride at seeing his command becoming functional again warred with discomfort at the primitive methods being employed. The elegant sophistication of Council technology had been replaced with loud, crude machinery that required constant manual monitoring and adjustment. Yet he could not deny the results. For the first time in weeks, the station had reliable power distribution, working communications, and functional weapon systems, all achieved through technology that predated galactic civilization by millennia. Chen approached him, wiping grease from her hands with a cloth. Her team had been working for 18 hours straight, with only brief breaks for food and water. Human endurance was proving to be as remarkable as their technical ingenuity. Admiral, we have 70% of primary systems operational on mechanical backup. Life support, communications, basic navigation, and defensive weapons are all functional. It is not pretty and it is not fast, but it works. The silence cannot affect machines that do not use electronic components. Kareth gestured with his anterior appendages in appreciation. Dr. Chen, I must admit I doubted whether this approach would succeed. I have spent my entire life surrounded by advanced technology. Seeing it replaced with gears and levers feels like stepping backward in time. Chen smiled grimly. Admiral, my species has a saying, if it is stupid but it works, it is not stupid. Right now, your advanced technology is dead weight. Our primitive machines are keeping your station alive. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when the new ways stop working. She paused, checking a data tablet that ran on simple battery power and basic circuits isolated from the affected systems. We have another problem, though. The silence has moved faster than your projections indicated. It will reach this station in approximately 6 hours. Once it does, even our isolated electronic devices will fail. We will be operating purely on mechanical principles. That was actually good news as far as Kareth was concerned. If humans could maintain station operations using only mechanical systems, they would be completely immune to the silence. The real concern was the Vex Collective. Intelligence reports suggested a major Vex fleet was moving toward this sector, likely planning to capture Council Station Omega and use it as a forward base for deeper penetration into Council space. Without functional ships to mount a defense, the station would fall quickly. Chen seemed to read his thoughts. You are worried about the Vex attack. So am I. We need to get your defense fleet operational before they arrive. Kareth's spiracles fluttered with agitation. Doctor, we have 300 ships in this sector. Even if we could install mechanical controls on all of them, we do not have time. The Vex will be here in less than 2 days. Then we prioritize, Chen said decisively. We focus on your smallest, fastest ships, fighters and interceptors. Install basic mechanical flight controls, manual weapon systems, and simple navigation equipment. We turned them into what we called space superiority fighters during our early space warfare development. Basic, maneuverable, deadly. Kareth considered this. Most galactic warfare relied on massive capital ships with sophisticated targeting systems and automated defense networks. Small craft were considered obsolete, useful only for reconnaissance or transport. The idea of using them as primary combat vessels seemed absurd. But in a galaxy where advanced systems no longer functioned, absurdity might be the only option. He gave the order. Every available engineer, both human and alien, was assigned to retrofit the station's fighter complement with mechanical controls. The work proceeded at a frantic pace. Human technicians taught alien counterparts the principles of hydraulic systems, cable-operated controls, and manual targeting. The aliens struggled at first with concepts that seemed impossibly primitive. Why would anyone aim weapons by hand when computers could calculate perfect firing solutions? Why fly manually when automated systems could react faster than any organic pilot? The humans explained patiently. Because when the computers stop working, the pilot who knows how to fly by instinct survives. Because manual targeting might be less accurate, but it is infinitely better than no targeting at all. Because redundancy and simplicity beat sophistication when sophistication fails. 28 hours after the retrofit operation began, Commander Marcus Webb stood in the fighter bay addressing a mixed group of human and alien pilots. Webb was a lean man in his early 40s with the weathered look of someone who had spent years in combat situations. He had flown atmospheric fighter craft on Earth during the Pacific conflict and transitioned to space combat when humanity began its expansion beyond the home system. Now he found himself teaching alien pilots how to fight using techniques developed in Earth's bloodiest wars. "All right, listen up," Webb began, his voice carrying across the bay. "What we have here are 74 operational fighters equipped with mechanical controls. No automation, no computer assistance, no predictive targeting. You are going to fly these birds using your eyes, your hands, and your judgment. Some of you are looking at me like I am insane. I get it. This is not what you were trained for. But neither was I trained for this situation, and we adapt or we die." A Nephron pilot raised one of her crystalline appendages. "Commander Webb, our species has not engaged in manual piloting for 6,000 years. Our neural interfaces allow us to control ships through direct thought connection. How can we possibly compete with an enemy using advanced systems while operating such primitive equipment?" Webb grinned, and it was not a friendly expression. "Because the enemy is expecting you to fight like civilized people using civilized methods. They are expecting long-range missile exchanges and coordinated fleet maneuvers. They are not expecting what we are about to do. We are going to fight dirty. We are going to use tactics that predate space warfare entirely. We are going to show them what happens when Deathworld survivors stop playing by galactic rules." He activated a holographic projector, one of the few electronic devices still functioning inside its Faraday cage shielding. The display showed historical footage from Earth's Second World War, atmospheric fighters engaging in close combat over burning cities. "Watch this. These are human pilots from 300 years ago. They had no computers, no guided missiles, just machine guns, bombs, and the courage to fly directly at enemy aircraft and shoot until one side was dead. They called it dogfighting. Close-quarters aerial combat where victory went to the pilot with better instincts, faster reactions, and more aggressive tactics." The alien pilots watched in horrified fascination as the footage showed aircraft performing violent maneuvers, spinning and diving and climbing in complex patterns while streams of tracer fire crossed between them. It looked like insanity, the complete opposite of the orderly, long-range warfare they had been trained for. "This is what we are going to do," Webb continued. "The Vex have sophisticated targeting systems and powerful weapons. But those systems are designed for engaging targets at maximum range using computer-calculated firing solutions. They are not designed for close combat with maneuvering targets at knife-fighting distances. We are going to get in close, inside their effective targeting envelope, and we are going to shoot them to pieces before they can adjust their tactics. It will be violent. It will be dangerous. Many of us will probably die. But we will win, because we are willing to fight in ways they never imagined." Dr. Chen approached Webb as the pilots dispersed to their fighters. "Marcus, you realize this is completely crazy, right? You are teaching aliens how to conduct space combat using World War II fighter tactics." Webb shrugged. "Sarah, my grandmother flew combat missions over the Pacific in an aircraft made of aluminum and canvas, powered by a piston engine, armed with guns that jammed half the time. She faced enemies who were willing to deliberately crash into her ship to destroy it. She survived because she was tougher, meaner, and more stubborn than the other side. That is what Deathworld survivors do. We fight with whatever we have, and we win because losing is not an option." The Vex fleet arrived 36 hours later. Sensors showed 147 ships of various classes, all protected by the mysterious shielding that kept their electronics functioning despite the silence. They approached in perfect formation, confident in their technological superiority. Admiral Kareth watched from the station's command center as the enemy fleet closed to weapons range. His tactical display, now a mechanical plotting board operated by 3 human technicians with paper notes and colored pins, showed the situation clearly. The Vex had overwhelming firepower. They would bombard the station into rubble unless the defense forces could stop them. "This is insane," muttered Counselor Mavesh, her scales flickering with anxiety. "We are about to fight an advanced fleet using technology that would be considered obsolete by our ancestors 10,000 years ago." Kareth surprised himself by feeling calm. Perhaps because the situation was so desperate that fear no longer mattered, or perhaps because he had seen what humans could accomplish with primitive tools and stubborn determination. He opened the communication channel to the fighter squadrons. "All units, this is Admiral Kareth. You have trained for this. You know your assignments. The Vex believe they face a helpless enemy. Show them how wrong they are. Commander Webb, you have operational command of all fighter elements. Good hunting." Webb's voice came back through the mechanical radio system, distorted by static but clear enough. "Roger that, Admiral. All fighters, this is Reaper Lead. Execute attack plan Alpha 7. Time to teach these people about Death World warfare. Close formation, high-speed approach, break and engage at 1,000 kilometers. Weapons free on my mark. For Earth, for the Council, for every world threatened by these invaders. Let's go to work." The 74 fighters launched from Council Station Omega in a tight formation, accelerating to maximum velocity on chemical rocket thrust. They looked like ancient projectiles compared to the sleek Vex ships, crude and inelegant. The Vex fleet adjusted course, clearly preparing to destroy the insignificant fighter craft with a single coordinated missile strike. But the missiles, guided by sophisticated targeting computers, required time to lock onto their targets and calculate optimal intercept courses. Time the human-led formation did not give them. At 2,000 kilometers, Webb gave the order. "All units break and engage. Random evasive maneuvers. Get in close and make every shot count. Show them what chaos looks like." The tight formation exploded into 74 individual fighters, each executing unpredictable zigzag patterns at maximum thrust. The Vex targeting computers, designed for tracking orderly military formations and calculating precise firing solutions, struggled to process the chaotic movement. Missiles launched and missed by wide margins as their guidance systems tried to predict target movement based on logical tactical doctrine. But there was nothing logical about what the fighters were doing. They flew like drunk insects, spinning and tumbling and accelerating in patterns that made no tactical sense, because they were not trying to make tactical sense. They were creating chaos. They were overwhelming sophisticated systems with simple unpredictability. They were fighting like humans fought on death worlds, where survival was not about following rules but about doing whatever it took to live another day. The fighters closed to point-blank range, far closer than any sane military doctrine recommended. At distances measured in hundreds of meters, they opened fire with simple kinetic cannons and unguided rockets. The weapons were crude, requiring manual aim and timing, but at this range, even crude weapons were devastating. Vex ships, designed for long-range combat, had minimal armor on their flanks and engines. The fighters tore into them like piranha attacking whales. Small and individually weak but deadly in overwhelming numbers and aggression, the Vex fleet tried to adjust, tried to bring their superior firepower to bear. But their ships were large and slow to maneuver. Their weapon systems were designed for targets at respectful distances, not for enemies literally scraping past their hulls at insane velocities. The fighters were too close, too fast, too unpredictable. Every time a Vex targeting computer achieved lock, the target was already somewhere else, replaced by a different fighter attacking from a different angle. It was chaos. It was madness. It was how humans had fought wars for thousands of years before they ever reached the stars, and it was brutally, terribly effective. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, 61 Vex ships had been destroyed or disabled. 29 fighters had been lost, their pilots dying in the violent close-quarters combat they had trained for. But the Vex fleet broke off and retreated, unwilling to face the insane death world tactics that turned their technological advantage into a liability. Admiral Kareth stood in the command center, staring at the mechanical plotting board in disbelief. They had won. Against a superior force using superior technology, they had won through primitive weapons and aggressive tactics that belonged to a darker, more violent age. Counselor Mavesh approached him slowly. "Admiral, I have witnessed many things in my long life, but I have never seen anything like this." Commander Webb's voice came through the communication system, tired but triumphant. "Station Omega, this is Reaper Lead. The Vex are running with their tails between their legs. All surviving fighters are returning to base. Mission accomplished." Kareth activated his transmitter. "Well done, Commander. Well done to all of you. You have just written the first chapter of a new type of warfare." Webb chuckled. "Admiral, this is not new warfare. This is old warfare. Really old. We just proved that sometimes the ancient ways still work." The galaxy might have forgotten how to fight without computers and automation, but humans never did. Because on Earth, if you forget how to fight, you die. We are survivors, and survivors do whatever it takes to win. The fighters began landing, battered and scarred, but victorious. Dr. Chen stood beside Kareth, watching the pilots emerge from their craft. See, Admiral? Deathworld ingenuity. When everything else fails, you fall back on the basics. Simple machines, manual skills, and the absolute refusal to give up no matter how bad the odds look. That is what humans bring to the galaxy. That is what legends are made of. Legends of the analog war. The victory at Council Station Omega changed everything. Within days, the news spread across the remaining functional communication networks. Humans, the young species from the Death World, had defeated a superior Vex fleet using primitive technology and aggressive tactics. The story became legend as it traveled from station to station, world to world. Some claimed the humans had brought ancient war machines from their violent past. Others said they fought with such ferocity that the Vex had fled in terror. The truth was somehow both simpler and more impressive than the legends. Humans had won because they refused to accept the limitations that sophisticated technology imposed on galactic thinking. When everyone else saw impossible obstacles, humans saw problems to solve with whatever tools remained available. Admiral Kareth found himself in an unprecedented situation. As word of the victory spread, requests flooded in from council commanders across the galaxy. Everyone wanted human engineers. Everyone wanted to learn the analog techniques that made their forces immune to the silence. The Galactic Council, evacuated to a heavily shielded emergency facility in the Kepler cluster, officially authorized what they called the Analog Protocol. Human teams would be dispatched to critical facilities throughout Council space to implement mechanical backup systems and train alien personnel in low-technology warfare. It was an admission that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were asking the newest, most primitive member species to teach them how to survive. Dr. Sarah Chen led the largest human contingent, a team of 500 engineers and technicians assembled from every nation on Earth. They arrived in a convoy of human transport ships, ugly and functional vessels that looked out of place among the elegant architecture of galactic spacecraft. But those ships worked when everything else failed, and that was worth more than aesthetic beauty. Chen established her headquarters on Council Station Omega, coordinating the massive effort to retrofit thousands of facilities with analog systems. She worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee that alien species found alarmingly toxic, and sleeping in brief snatches between crisis calls. The challenges were enormous. Many alien species had no cultural memory of mechanical engineering. The concept seemed alien and counterintuitive to beings who had used quantum computing and neural interfaces for countless generations. Chen's teams became teachers as much as engineers, running workshops on basic physics, mechanical advantage, and manual calculation methods. They taught crystalline nephron engineers how to build simple machines, despite having no personal experience with crude matter manipulation. They showed the aquatic Talvani how to operate pressure-based control systems. They trained the plant-based Verdanian techniques for building wooden structures and fiber-based mechanisms using materials from their own bodies. It was exhausting, frustrating work. But gradually, the galaxy adapted. More stations came online with mechanical systems. More ships were retrofitted with manual controls. The communication network expanded as human technicians installed telegraph systems and signal beacon arrays that operated without electronic components. It was like watching civilization rebuild itself from first principles, using knowledge humanity had preserved simply because Earth was too dangerous to ever completely trust advanced technology. Commander Marcus Webb took on a different role. The Galactic Council Military Command recognized that human combat doctrine offered significant advantages in the current crisis. Webb found himself promoted to the newly created position of Special Tactics Advisor and given authority to train mixed-species strike forces in what the galaxy was starting to call Death World warfare. His training facility was established on a barren moon orbiting a gas giant in neutral space, far from Vex incursions, but close enough to deploy rapidly when needed. The training was brutal by galactic standards. Webb pushed his alien students through exercises that would have been considered abusive in civilian context. He forced them to navigate without computer assistance, using only star charts and manual calculation. He required them to maintain their equipment personally, taking apart and reassembling every system until they understood it completely. He ran combat simulations where electronic systems randomly failed, forcing pilots and soldiers to continue their missions using backup manual methods. Many aliens struggled with this approach. Their cultures valued intellectual achievement and sophisticated problem-solving, not crude physical prowess and mechanical skills. But Webb was relentless. "You do not have the luxury of playing to your strengths anymore," he told them repeatedly. "The silence took away your advanced technology. The Vex are hunting you. You need to learn how to fight when everything you depended on stops working. You need to become survivors, not just soldiers." Slowly, the students began to understand. A Nephron pilot who failed the same navigation exercise 3 times finally succeeded by using manual calculation methods, and the pride in her crystalline features was unmistakable. A Talvani engineer who struggled with mechanical repairs finally rebuilt an entire engine assembly by hand and wept with joy at the accomplishment. A Verdani soldier who had never fired a weapon without computer assistance made a perfect manual shot at 800 meters and stood in stunned silence at what he had achieved. They were learning. They were adapting. They were becoming legends in their own right. Meanwhile, the silence continued its inexorable expansion. It had now consumed 70% of the galaxy. Billions of beings struggled to survive on worlds where infrastructure had collapsed. The Vex Collective controlled vast territories, enslaving populations and plundering resources. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The Council forces were no longer helpless victims. They could fight back. Dr. Chen developed what she called a mechanical prediction computer, a massive device that used thousands of gears and calculators to analyze Vex movement patterns and predict their strategic objectives. The computer was enormous, filling an entire building on Council Station Omega, and required 50 operators to function. It took hours to produce results that quantum computers could have calculated in nanoseconds, but it worked, and its predictions proved remarkably accurate. The Vex operated on logical, strategic principles, conquering territory in efficient patterns designed to maximize resource capture. The mechanical computer could model those patterns and forecast where the Vex would strike next. Armed with this intelligence, Council forces began setting ambushes and preparing defenses before the enemy arrived. They won battle after battle, not through superior technology but through knowledge and preparation. The turning point came at the Battle of Ethan Prime, a heavily populated world in what had once been the heart of Council territory. Intelligence indicated a massive Vex assault was imminent. The world had already been touched by the silence, its defensive grid offline, its population centers vulnerable. But Chen's mechanical computer had predicted the attack weeks in advance, giving the Council forces time to prepare. Commander Webb assembled a strike force of 2,000 fighters and bombers, all equipped with mechanical controls and manual weapon systems. The pilots came from 40 different species, trained in human combat doctrine and ready to fight like Deathworld survivors. Admiral Kareth commanded the operation from Council Station Omega, coordinating fleet movements using mechanical communications and manual plotting. The Vex fleet arrived in overwhelming force, 300 capital ships supported by thousands of fighters and assault craft. They expected to find a helpless world ready for conquest. Instead, they found an ambush. The Council forces struck from multiple directions simultaneously, using tactics borrowed from Earth's naval warfare history. Small fast ships harassed the Vex fleet from unexpected angles, while heavier bombers attacked vulnerable points in their formation. Fighters equipped with simple kinetic weapons and unguided rockets tore into Vex supply lines and communication relays. Ground forces, trained by human special operations advisors, launched guerrilla attacks on Vex landing parties using improvised weapons and trap-based defenses. It was chaos, a style of warfare the Vex had never encountered. Their sophisticated battle computers tried to calculate optimal response strategies, but kept failing because human tactics made no logical sense from a traditional military perspective. Why would small ships deliberately close to suicidal range? Why would ground forces sacrifice optimal positioning for unexpected attack angles? Why would pilots perform inefficient maneuvers that wasted fuel and reduced combat effectiveness? Because humans had learned to fight on a world where logic took second place to survival. Because Deathworld warfare was not about efficiency, it was about winning through any means necessary. Because sometimes the illogical choice was the only choice that worked. The Battle of Ethan Prime lasted 3 days. When it ended, the Vex fleet had been shattered. Over 200 enemy ships destroyed or captured, their crews taken prisoner or killed in the fighting. The Council lost 48 vessels and approximately 6,000 personnel, casualties that would have been catastrophic by peacetime standards, but were considered acceptable given the strategic victory achieved. More importantly, the Vex High Command learned a terrible lesson. They were no longer fighting a helpless enemy. They were fighting an enemy that had adapted, that had learned new tactics that had become unpredictable and dangerous. The psychological impact was enormous. Vex commanders became cautious, uncertain. Their advance slowed and then stopped as they reassessed their strategic position. Council Station Omega became the command center for the counteroffensive. Human engineers worked alongside alien counterparts to develop new mechanical technologies, specifically designed for wartime use. They created spring-loaded launchers for deploying orbital mines without electronic guidance. They built clockwork timing mechanisms for coordinating simultaneous attacks across multiple locations. They developed pressure-sensitive targeting systems that could track ships through gravitational distortion rather than electronic signatures. Every innovation was shared freely across the Alliance. The humans refused payment or special privileges, insisting they were simply doing their part to defend civilization. Dr. Chen explained it to Admiral Kareth one evening as they shared a meal in the station's observation lounge. "Admiral, humans come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We survived because we learned to work together, to share knowledge, to help each other when things got difficult. That is the Death World lesson. Not that you should be violent and aggressive, but that you should value cooperation and mutual support above everything else. Because alone you die, together you survive." Kareth had grown to deeply respect Chen over the months of working together. She represented something he had never encountered before in galactic civilization, a being who combined advanced scientific knowledge with practical manual skills, who could design sophisticated systems, but also build them with her own hands, who thought in terms of what could be accomplished rather than what should be theoretically possible. He had nominated her for the Council's highest civilian honor, the Star of Unity, traditionally awarded to beings who had made extraordinary contributions to galactic peace and prosperity. The nomination had been approved unanimously. The war against the Vex continued for another 14 months. But it was no longer a war of conquest and helpless retreat. It became a war of attrition, with Council forces gradually pushing back the Vex expansion and reclaiming lost territory. The silence remained, still spreading slowly across the galaxy, still shutting down electronic systems wherever it reached. But it no longer meant automatic defeat. Civilization had adapted. Species that had relied entirely on advanced technology for thousands of years had remembered how to do things the hard way, the manual way, the human way. Finally, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A team of Nephron scientists working with human physicists discovered the mechanism behind the silence. It was not a weapon or a natural phenomenon. It was an unintended side effect of Vex faster-than-light drive technology. Their ships generated a quantum field that disrupted electronic systems as a byproduct of their propulsion method. The Vex had learned to shield their own ships but had weaponized the effect against everyone else. Once the mechanism was understood, countermeasures could be developed. Within 6 months, shielding technology was deployed across Council space. Electronic systems began functioning again. The silence retreated. The galaxy could rebuild, but the galaxy that emerged from the crisis was different from the one that had entered it. The analog protocol remained in place, not as a temporary emergency measure but as permanent policy. Every ship, every station, every critical facility maintained mechanical backup systems. Military personnel learned manual skills and low-technology warfare techniques. Engineering curricula included courses on mechanical principles and non-electronic problem-solving. Humanity was granted full voting membership in the Galactic Council and given a permanent seat on the Military Command Authority. Earth became a center of learning, with thousands of alien students arriving each year to study at human universities and technical schools. Dr. Sarah, Chen retired from active engineering work and accepted a teaching position at the Galactic Technical Institute, where she spent the next 30 years training generations of students in analog systems design. Commander Marcus Webb became the first human to command a mixed-species fleet, leading Council forces in peacekeeping operations across multiple sectors. Admiral Kareth served 15 more years before retiring to write his memoirs. His book, titled Lessons from the Death World, became required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy. In it, he wrote about the day humans arrived at Council Station Omega and changed everything. He wrote about learning that sophistication was not the same as capability, that primitive did not mean ineffective, that the newest member of the galactic community had lessons to teach that the oldest civilizations had forgotten. He wrote about how crisis had forced the galaxy to confront its dependence on technology and rediscover the value of manual skills and practical knowledge. Most importantly, he wrote about the humans themselves, about their stubbornness and creativity and absolute refusal to accept defeat, about how beings from a world that tried to kill them every day had become the galaxy's unexpected saviors. The analog war, as historians came to call it, passed into legend. Stories spread across thousands of worlds about the humans who arrived with ancient machines and primitive weapons, and saved galactic civilization through sheer determination and death world ingenuity. Some stories were exaggerated, some were simplified, but all of them carried the same essential truth. When the stars went silent and everything advanced, species had built collapsed into uselessness. The humans from Earth showed everyone what survival really meant, not through superior technology or greater intelligence, but through the fundamental understanding that problems exist to be solved, that obstacles exist to be overcome, and that giving up is never an option when lives depend on you. They taught the galaxy to fight like Death World survivors, to build like Death World engineers, to think like Death World problem solvers. They became legends not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than everyone else, but because they refused to let impossible odds stop them from doing what needed to be done. And in the process, they proved what humans had always known deep in their bones, that the best technology is the technology that works when you need it most, that the best tactics are the tactics that win the fight, that the best lesson any civilization can learn is this: never underestimate the survivors of a death world, because they have learned to overcome challenges that would destroy any other species. They have learned to adapt. They have learned to improvise. They have learned to win. The humans had arrived as unknown newcomers requesting observer status in a galaxy of advanced civilizations. They departed as legends, teachers, and honored members of a community that had learned to value practical wisdom as much as theoretical knowledge. The stars had gone silent, but humanity's voice had rung out loud and clear, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson those Death World survivors had taught them all.